Aperture is one of the 3 pillars of photography. Understanding it is crucial for anyone who wants to take great photos, whether you're using a smartphone or a professional camera. So, what exactly is aperture? Let's dive in. Aperture is the physical opening in your lens that controls how much light enters your camera. This opening is adjustable and is measured in what's called f-stops. The lower the f-stop, the larger the opening, and the more light that enters your camera. The higher the f-stop, the smaller the opening, and the less light that enters your camera. Aperture doesn't just affect exposure. It also varies what's called depth of field in your photos. This refers to the range of distance in your photo that appears in focus. A wide aperture, low f-stop, will produce a shallow depth of field, which means that only a small portion of your photo will be in focus. This can be great for portraits or artistic shots where you want to blur out the background and focus just on your subject. A narrow aperture, or high f-stop, will produce a deep depth of field, which means that more of your photo will be in focus. This is useful for landscape or architectural photography, where you want everything in the scene to be sharp and clear. So how do we control aperture? Adjusting it is easy once you know how to do it. Most cameras, including smartphones, have a way to adjust aperture manually. When you adjust the aperture, you'll see the f-stop number change on your camera's display. You'll also notice that the exposure of your photo changes as you adjust the aperture, and this is visible on your viewfinder before you even take a shot. With mirrorless cameras. Be careful with this though. If you're shooting in manual mode, which I highly recommend, you'll need to adjust the shutter speed or ISO to compensate for changes in exposure when you adjust the aperture. These are the other 2 pillars of photography and they all work together. For example, if you're shooting in low light and need a wider aperture to let in more light, you'll need to use a slower shutter speed or a higher ISO to avoid underexposure. Understanding exposure is crucial for taking great photos, so it's important to practice adjusting the aperture, shutter speed and ISO to get the perfect exposure for your shot. It's important to note that not all lenses have the same maximum aperture. Some lenses, like prime or fixed lenses, usually have a wider maximum aperture than zoom lenses, and as such will give you more dreamy bokeh, and are considered faster lenses. This is important to consider when you're choosing a lens for your camera. Bokeh is a term that refers to the aesthetic quality of the out of focus areas in your photo. When you use a wide aperture, or low f number, you'll produce a shallow depth of field and blur out the background of your photo. This can create a beautiful bokeh effect where the background appears as a soft, dreamy blur. It's a popular technique in portrait photography, for example, where it can be used to isolate the subject from the background and create a more intimate, artistic shot. To achieve a bokeh effect, you'll need to use a lens with a wider maximum aperture, like f1.8, and position your subject a good distance away from the background. Remember, the amount of bokeh in your photo will depend on several factors, including the aperture, also the distance between your subject and the background, and the focal length of your lens. But that's also for another time, I think. The best advice I would have now is to go out and practice. Really see the differences that wide and narrow apertures give you, and notice the byproducts of this when it comes to your shutter speed and ISO. The interaction of all of these is really the essence of photography and will allow you so much room to grow and get creative with your art. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel for more photography tips and tutorials. And don't forget to leave a comment down below if you have any questions or feedback. Stay curious, happy shooting.